Good evening and welcome to this special edition of Demolition Live. I'm your host, Mark Anthony, and I sincerely wish we were meeting under better and less sombre circumstances. But today marks the 5th anniversary of the 2016 incident in which 4 workers were tragically killed when the boiler house at the Didcot A Power Station collapsed during its demolition. Some of you will have already seen a film that we produced to mark this anniversary. If not, we will be playing again very shortly. But this show is not about me. It's not about our film. We're hosting this show to allow you to share your thoughts and your recollections on the UK demolition industry's darkest day. There's no script, no formal structure. All I would ask is that you remember that this live show is being aired on a public platform. This is no place for rumour, for speculation, or accusations either. I very much doubt that they're watching live, but please keep in mind that the families of the 4 men that perished on that day could well see this video and the accompanying comments. So I would ask you to be as respectful as possible to those families and obviously to the memories of Mick Collins, Ken Cresswell, Christopher Huxtable and John Shaw. I have a lot to say on this subject, on the fact that 5 years have elapsed now without resolution or closure, and about the fact that the incident has apparently been largely forgotten by the media. But before we start, I guess let's take a look at the film and we'll see how we go from there. I'll see you after the movie.
"5 years ago tomorrow, I was stood on this exact spot. In front of me was a Sky TV cameraman, and slightly to my right was a Sky TV presenter. It was bitterly cold. All of us had arrived while it was still dark. But as the sun came up, I realised why we'd chosen this spot. Because over there was a scene of utter devastation. It was the scene of a collapsed boiler house. None of us knew it at the time, but what we were looking at was the worst demolition disaster in living memory.
I'm standing at the entrance to Didcot A. As John was saying there, this is the site that is being decommissioned. Some cooling towers remaining. And here at the entrance, a tight police cordon.
Fire and rescue teams from around the country are helping in this operation. 1 demolition worker is confirmed dead, and rescuers do not hold out much hope for the 3 who are still missing.
Oxfordshire County Council are telling us that there's been 1 fatality. They're confirming 1 fatality.
None of us could have known that 5 years later we'd still be none the wiser about what caused that accident. Or that 5 years later the families of the 4 men killed on that tragic day would still be waiting to find out why their loved ones had gone to work and never came home. Many years ago I visited Loch Ness. Obviously I didn't see the monster. But as I stood on the banks of that vast expanse of water, I understood how the myth had emerged. Loch Ness is unusually quiet. It's cold. There's something about it that's just off. I know it's only my mind making associations that aren't real, but Didcot feels like that to me now. Like there's something just not quite right. The media was camped on the road that day, and I learned a lot about the way that the media works. I came here to see Sky TV, but as my interview with Sky TV ended, somebody from the BBC approached me and asked me to do an interview with them. When I finished with the BBC, I was asked to do one with ITV, and then with Channel 4. Over the course of the day, I did 11 TV interviews, plus a whole host more with news and media outlets, including newspapers and radio stations.
There was a police cordon in place that day. 2 police officers were stood here to prevent traffic from getting too close to the scene. Like the rest of us, they were freezing cold. I talked to them for a while, and while we were talking, a lady came over carrying a wicker basket that looked like a prop from an episode of Miss Marple. It contained a thermos flask and several packs of homemade sandwiches. She handed the basket to the police officers and then left.
on a day filled with a growing sense of horror. That's a memory that's stuck with me ever since. I was here for both the first and the second anniversary of the Didcot disaster, both times to see the media. I was here for the third and the fourth, but I was here alone. And I'm here for the fifth. And I've no idea why I keep coming back, because I absolutely hate it here. I'd been driving home when I first heard news reports of an incident at the Didcot Power Station. Even though I'd been there several times at that point, my mind just didn't make the connection. It was only when I got home and my phone started to ring that I realised that the incident was demolition related. One of the things I remember from that day was how everyone was so careful in their use of language. For most of the day, everyone referred to men that were unaccounted for. It was only towards the end of the day that anyone dared utter the word missing. There was a huge amount of rumour and speculation too. Local people claimed they'd heard an explosion, and there were some initial fears that this was actually a terrorist attack. Local people attempted to reassure themselves with talk of a network of tunnels and basements in which the missing men might be hiding. Looking back, I don't think anyone was convinced. The first people to walk through these gates were the men that built the power station back in the late 1960s. Then came the men and women that kept the plant operational to provide electricity for the local region. Over the course of about 50 years, thousands of men and women walked through these gates. The last people to walk through these gates were the demolition men, responsible for taking the power station down. Over the course of more than 50 years, thousands of people walked through these gates, but 4 of them never walked back out again. The body of Mick Collins was recovered almost immediately, before the Health and Safety Executive threw a cordon around the entire site. The remains of the 3 other men would lay undiscovered for more than 6 months. They would not be recovered until after the remains of the collapsed boiler house had been felled in a controlled explosion on the morning of the 17th of July 2016. On the 31st of August 2016, 190 days after the boiler house collapsed, it was confirmed that a body had been found in the rubble. On the 3rd of September, that body was identified as Christopher Huxtable. On the 8th of September 2016, police confirmed they'd found the body of another of the remaining 2 missing men. On the 9th of September, the body was formally identified as that of Ken Cresswell. The last missing worker was found on the same day. He was identified as John Shaw. 199 days had elapsed since the day of the accident. I did about 20 media interviews the day after the accident. I've probably done about another 50 since. That's hundreds and hundreds of questions, and I fielded all of them. But I haven't answered any. There were no answers on the day after the accident. And as I stand here on the same spot that I was stood 1,826 days ago, I still don't have any answers. Sadly, painfully, and tragically, neither does anybody else.
Well, I wrote that, and obviously I'm in it, but that makes very, very tough watching. Obviously, I'm not alone. We've had quite a few comments coming in from people that are watching this for the first time. Martin, yeah, you're absolutely right. Andy, yeah, it really is. You know, I'm not really in the business of tugging at heartstrings. I just write about demolition for a living. But yeah, that one does hit home. Good evening, Nick. So very sad. What else can you say, really? It's a good point, Jonathan. Yeah, 5 years. You know, I remember it like it was yesterday. And oddly enough, I mean, I had to write about this a number of times over the last 5 years, both for myself and for others as well. And I don't have to check back. It's all still so fresh. Peter, good to see you here as always. I'm not sure if the families of the 4 men are watching or if they will get to see this, but that pretty much sums up the feelings of all of us, I think. That's really why we're here. the families, 5 years on, 1,826 days later, still have no closure. And just, I think, just putting a sense of reality on that. Scott, good evening, and thank you for your message. You lost a friend this day, Mick Collins. Not entirely sure what to say to that, really. I think one of the things that always strikes me about the demolition industry is the fact that it is a very close-knit community. Everybody knows everybody else. And even if you weren't working at Didcot at the time, or had been working at Didcot at the time, chances are you would have run across somebody that knew somebody that was there. Yeah, there's another comment there. Sadie, I honestly don't. I don't have the words. I do this for a living, and I don't have the words. I'm just 5 years on, Sadie. I'm so sorry for your loss. Wow, that one blindsided me. I didn't expect you to be watching, Sadie. So thank you for joining us. Jeff, yeah, you're absolutely right. When I was interviewed in the immediate aftermath of this, because obviously I write about incidents and accidents on a fairly regular basis, it was fairly clear that it would take some time for some sort of resolution. I predicted to a couple of the news channels that it would be 4 years before we had answers. Well, we're 5 years in, and not only do we not have answers, but we don't actually seem to be any closer to answers. As you probably saw on Demolition News earlier today, the Thames Valley Police issued a statement on the fact that, you know, they're respectfully remembering the 4 guys that died, but not giving us any update on the fact that, you know, there could be a prosecution or a resolution forthcoming anytime soon. Peter, I honestly don't know. My personal feeling is the fact that we need some mechanism that separates the prosecution, the likely prosecution, from the findings of the investigation. I realise there's always a concern about prejudicing a pending legal case and everything that goes with it. But the HSE and the Thames Valley Police and the respective experts in both of those have had the information and the data and the evidence before them for 5 years now. If there is a smoking gun, if there is some evidence that points towards what caused the accident in the first place, they know that. They know that. Now, okay, yes, they probably do need to get their legal ducks in a row, and, you know, I'm sure they have to present thousands upon thousands of pages of evidence that has to be referenced and checked and double checked. But that doesn't, or it shouldn't, stop them revealing the findings of that investigation. Anyone that watches Demolition News regularly will know that I recently interviewed a guy called Joe Vendetti, who is a US demolition expert. And the Americans have had their own accidents with boiler houses and power station demolition. There were 2 men killed just before Christmas, and there'd been several more before that. And Joe Vendetti's personal feeling is that there are probably 1,000, maybe 1,500 remaining fossil fueled power stations to come down around the world. And there is every possibility that there could be something locked within the findings of that Didcot investigation that could safeguard the men that are working, men and women that are likely to be working on those power stations. And because that information is still wrapped in bureaucracy and red tape, Joe Vendetti's forecast is that we could lose another 100 to 150 men, all because the legal system in this country moves so painfully slowly. Now, I understand the fact that we've lost the best part of a year to the COVID crisis and the subsequent lockdown. I do appreciate that. I understand that the HSE have a difficult job to do. I understand that the Thames Valley Police are working way, way outside their comfort zone. This is not the sort of thing that people sign up to become a police officer for. But that doesn't stop the fact that there were 4 years before COVID made landfall in the UK. And no progress had been made to that date either. Sadie, I don't have anything more I can add, really. I will keep banging this drum for as long as it takes to get some sort of resolution. I honestly don't know how long that's going to be. One of the things that struck me, I actually went to Didcot last week, basically to get the film in the can, but also to avoid any sort of media scrum. And I didn't want to run into members of the family, because I don't want to be seen to be standing on the toes of their grief and their recollections. So I went up there last week, and I'd probably been there now 7-8 times, and it's remarkable just how much the place has changed. I think the last time I was there, I'm fairly sure the cooling towers are still there. If not, the time before that, they certainly were. The gates are still there, but Erith contractors are on site now, and a lot of the site has been cleared. So much so, in fact, that when I drove down the road, I actually took the wrong turn and drove right past it. Once I got my bearings, it all made perfect sense. But it's changed. Everything's changed. Everything's changed at the power station itself. And yet the investigation and the demolition industry that could potentially benefit from that investigation remains unchanged. There was a lot of talk in the immediate aftermath of the accident about learning lessons and about issuing guidance, and about how we were all going to move forward. And I think I even referenced the idea that, to my mind, there would come a time when we would refer to the UK demolition industry as before Didcot and after Didcot. Well, we're now 5 years after Didcot, and nothing has changed. There are still power stations being demolished here and across the world, probably using the same methodology that was used at Didcot. And why wouldn't they? Nothing has been issued to suggest that they shouldn't be doing that. Yeah, we've had some more comments in here. Ken Hatcher, thanks, Ken. Answers are very hard to get. You're so right. Yeah, they really are. But my understanding is that the police have interviewed literally hundreds of people, people that have worked there while it was operational, people that were working there while it was being demolished. 5 years. I mean, not that my job is in any way comparable to what the police do and what the HSE do. But Peter will back me up on this. Peter Haddock will back me up on this. I can research and produce and publish and broadcast an interview in a matter of hours. It doesn't take 5 years. Martin, yeah, your thoughts are the same as mine. Sadie will keep banging that drum for justice. Absolutely. I'd like to think that it can't happen ever again. But I'm a realist and a cynic, and I have a horrible feeling that it will. As I say, we've had further fatalities in the States. We've had a fatality here at Longanet Power Station. There are 1,000, 1,500 power stations to come down around the world. I cannot, as much as I wish it with every ounce of my being, I cannot imagine that many power stations coming down without further fatalities. Good question, Scott. My understanding is that there have been independent consultants consulted, as that's what you do with a consultant. But once again, because they are being consulted, they are sort of locked behind a legal framework, so that they, like the contractor involved, like the families of the men that were killed on the day, can't talk about it. It's all under lock and key, and they are sworn to secrecy. And so it goes on. Ken, what have you got to say? Yeah, well, unfortunately, this is one of those many instances where I'd like to be proven wrong. I'd love the next 1,500 power stations to come down with no incidents. It'll give me less to write about, but that would be perfect. That would suit me just about fine. And speaking of writing about, as I said in the film there, I was part of a media scrum on the day after the accident. On the first anniversary, I was invited back and did probably another 12, maybe 15 interviews with various news outlets. I've done radio interviews and TV interviews and local newspaper interviews every single year. Multiples, sometimes 5, 6, 7 at a time. And this year, I've done one. I was on BBC Radio Oxford at 7:30 this morning. Obviously, BBC Radio Oxford is the local news outlet, the nearest one to Didcot. They have followed it as much as I have, if not slightly more. From the very outset, they've followed the story and they've kept banging the drum. But everybody else seems to have just forgotten. Now, I understand the fact that here in the UK we have had the COVID crisis to contend with. We've lost, I think at last time I checked, was 120, maybe 130,000 UK citizens as a result of the COVID crisis. And I guess set against that background, the death of 4 men 5 years ago in an accident maybe doesn't seem that important. Doesn't seem important to the BBC News or to Sky News or ITV News. But it's very, very important to the demolition industry. And it's even more important to the families of the 4 men that were killed. I know one of the things that Boris Johnson and in his time Donald Trump and subsequently Joe Biden have said all along, it's very easy to say about the number of deaths from COVID, 120,000, 130,000, 200,000, whatever it might be. But each of those is an individual. Each of those is a son or a daughter or a niece or a nephew or a husband or a wife. Same applies. Same applies with the 4 guys that lost their lives at Didcot. I clicked onto Facebook this morning, and I won't name names, but one of the daughters of the guys that were killed there had put up a post just remembering her father. Remembering her father who went to work, working man, hard hat, high vis, safety boots, went to work to keep his family, to keep a roof over their head, to keep food on the table. And that was the last time they saw him. That's in no way will that ever be right, regardless of the findings of the investigation. Even if the findings are that everybody involved, from the client through the contractor through the builders of the power station, even if everybody is exonerated, that's still never going to be right. I think we all accept that demolition is a hazardous environment in which to work. I think we all accept that power station demolition is notoriously hazardous as well, which I guess is why it's generally left up to 2 or 3 companies to take care of that, because they've got the experience. Not suggesting for one moment that Coleman's lack of experience was in any way to blame for what happened. I don't have all the facts, and as I said before, those facts are still under lock and key within an HSE laboratory somewhere in Buxton in Derbyshire, is what I understand. it is a hazardous industry. I think everybody that goes to work in demolition is very aware of that. We are reminded on a daily basis through toolbox talks and briefings and accident reports and accident warnings and briefings. We're reminded of this all the time. But we live in the 21st century. Men and women going to work, regardless of industry sector, regardless of geographic location, regardless of environment and specific application. People that go to work for a living have every right to go back home again afterwards, back to their loved ones. I'm struck by the fact that, and I understand why the health and safety executive initially put a cordon around the partially collapsed boiler house. I know the original estimates were that there was something like 15 or 20,000 tons of steel came down when part of it came down, and there was probably as much again still suspended in the air and potentially dangerous. I understand that. I understand the fact that the HSE were determined not to put more men in harm's way as part of a rescue or recovery mission. I fully appreciate that. But we have at our disposal remote control machines. We have at our disposal drones, both of which are used extensively in the demolition industry. In fact, remote controlled machines were used to place explosives that brought down the remainder of that boiler house. And yet, seemingly to ensure that that crime scene, which is how it was treated, remained secure and untouched. We allowed a situation to arise where the remains of three of those four men remained undiscovered, unrecovered for 199 days. These men weren't trapped in a submarine at the bottom of the ocean. They weren't on a distant planet. They weren't stranded on Mars or on the moon. These were in a power station in the UK, half a mile away from the nearest McDonald's and Starbucks. Now, I don't even know why I'm mentioning Starbucks and McDonald's, but just to show you, this accident didn't happen out in the wilds. It didn't happen in a remote location. This happened in a town that has all the amenities that you'd expect, like a McDonald's, like a Starbucks, like a railway station. 199 days before those bodies were recovered. Can you imagine the feelings of the four men? It's bad enough the fact that they will have received a phone call to say initially that there had been an accident. I guess another phone call then followed to say that their loved ones were missing. And they probably received another to say that missing had been escalated to presumed dead. That's bad enough, but then to have to wait for 6 months for a phone call to tell you what, yes, it was inevitable, those men were always going to be found. But that just prolonged and prolonged the agony and the suffering and the anguish of those four families for no good reason. As I say, somebody could quite easily have sent in a remote control machine. They could have sent over a drone. We don't have to deal with the aftermath of earthquakes and volcanoes here in the UK, but people do have the wherewithal to deal with that sort of thing, even if it meant bringing it in from outside, from the States, or where they do encounter that sort of thing. We had the wherewithal to actually go and bring those guys out. And for one reason or another, we did not. We chose not to. I am cynical. I'm bitter. I'm angry. But from the very outset, it seemed like the main focus of the cordon and the subsequent investigation was to ensure a prosecution. And that's fine, you know, if that's how it turns out to be, if somebody is found to be responsible, then I guess in the day and age that we live in, somebody may well end up facing corporate manslaughter charges and, you know, all that goes with it. But that is, to my mind, that's missing the point. What are you actually achieving with a prosecution that is more important than giving resolution and closure to bereaved families? Surely the needs of those families should be considered way more important, you know, of primary importance at a time when they've lost their loved ones. Not who's to blame, you know, there's who's going to stand responsible for it. Give the families what they wanted, what they deserved, and that is closure. And here we are 5 years later, and that 199-day wait, which was painful enough, has just been compounded for, as I said, more than 1,800 days. For the second time tonight, I'm at a loss for words. Maybe I should have scripted this after all. That can't be right. One of the things that was raised, and I know Joe Vendetti is, or he was, watching. Good evening, Joe. Thank you for joining us. One of the things that Joe pointed out to me when I spoke to him was the fact that in the States, the equivalent of the HSE, OSHA, can turn around a case in 18 months. Not 3 years, not 5 years, not 5 years and counting, but 18 months. And bearing in mind that the US is, in the nicest possible way, the most litigious nation on God's earth. If ever there was a country that was keen on blame and claim culture, then America is it. And yet, against that background, they can turn around an investigation and a prosecution and a case closure in 18 months. And here we are, 5 years later. The HSE should get their funding back. Yes, yeah. I listen, Robert, I wouldn't argue with that one iota. And despite everything, I don't actually blame the HSE. You know, ultimately, you know, they are working incredibly slowly, but I guess they need to be meticulous. But bearing in mind that this was a case that was so momentous and tragic, this is a case that was actually raised in the House of Commons. I got awfully uptight about at least one MP who seemed to be using the accident as a way to raise their profile. But raise your profile. You know, there should by now be an MP, either the MP responsible for Didcot, or from the hometown of, you know, of Mick or Ken or Chris or John. If an MP wants to make their name, here's your chance. Here's your chance. You know, you've got your expense account. You're not doing anything at the moment because you're not going to the House of Commons. Get off your backside and hold the HSE's feet to the flames. Get this resolved. Make a name for yourself, but make a name for yourself for a good reason. You know, by giving 4 innocent and incredibly dignified families some closure that they so richly deserve. I must stop saying I'm at a loss for words. There's lots of comments here. What we got here, I don't know how true that is. I mean, we live in an outsourcing culture, I guess. So if it is being outsourced, it wouldn't surprise me in the least. Where was Arca in this? I honestly don't know. My guess is if it was being prepped for, if the building was being prepped for demolition, my guess is that the asbestos, if there was any, which I guess there would have been long gone by then, but I don't actually know. Yeah, absolutely. That's my mind. That's my mindset on this. The remaining part of the building should have been made safe, so that the bodies could have been recovered. And one of the things, there were many things that stick in my mind as a result of all of that. And I got a lot of phone calls from the people that were working there at the time, and also from fellow demolition contractors, and bearing in mind what demolition contractors do for a living. You know, they operate heavy equipment that regularly deals with large quantities of fallen steel and fallen debris. That's how they make their money. That's what they're experts at. So in the immediate aftermath, I kid you not, I must have had a dozen, maybe more phone calls from demolition contractors here and further afield who were offering their services to go in and get the 4 guys out, or the 3 guys out. And that fell on deaf ears. Again, it comes back to this desire, apparently, to protect what was being seen as a crime scene. And yes, you know, ultimately, when this does finally resolve itself, maybe it will turn out to have been a crime scene. And yes, they were right to throw a cordon around it. But when you think about a crime scene, you know, my wife watches enough crime dramas on the TV to know that when there's been a murder, the forensic team go in, they gather their evidence, and then the body is removed. And it's removed within hours and days of the accident happening or the incident happening, not 6 months. Nobody expects a murder victim or an accident victim to lay there undiscovered and unrecovered for 199 days. Jeff, good evening. What have you got to say here? The aviation industry, rail network, space agency, major accident. Jeff, that is such a good point. Particularly the aviation industry. If you think about the way that the aviation industry works, if I don't know planes, but let's just say a Boeing 747 goes down for some inexplicable reason, the global fleet of Boeing 747s are grounded while that investigation is undertaken. And that investigation is over and done with in a matter of days, so that those planes can get back in the air. How is this? Why is this any different? as far as I can see, it really isn't. And I think that's a very valid point you've made there, Jeff. I'm scanning around the comments here. Yeah, I listen. There are a few comments, as I feared there might be, that are probably not best aired. They're there on Facebook, and if you'd like to read them, if you're on Facebook, you can look at them. I'm not going to put them on screen here. It's very easy for me to sit here in a very comfortable office, and I think it's very easy for others to sit remotely and suggest who was to blame. And a lasting memory of my day there, the day after the accident, was the fact that there were queues of armchair experts. It seemed that half of Didcot were structural engineers that crawled out of the woodwork to claim that they foresaw the accident happening, and they'd warned their friends down the pub that Didcot was an accident waiting to happen. You would think that if they were that much of an expert, they might have consulted maybe the contractor responsible, or the HSE, or the authorities, but they didn't do that. But they were suddenly experts. They were imbued with second sight the moment the accident happened. So I'm not going to, as I said at the outset, I'm not going to put on this show rumor and speculation or accusation. And I think the memories of the four men deserve better than that. I'm quite willing for the HSE to present their findings and to lay blame as they see fit. That's their job. My job is merely to report on that. What did I hope to achieve from this show? I don't know. I honestly don't know. One thing that's very clear, I've known this all along. The demolition industry is very close knit. As I said very early on, I think a lot of people in the UK demolition industry will know of somebody that was there on the day, or that had been there, or was there afterwards. That's the nature of the industry. Do you know, I don't even know where I was going with it. I just think we just need to be mindful of the fact that, you know, there but for the grace of God. Interestingly, I think it was 6 months pretty much to the day that I was involved in a remarkably small and insignificant demolition accident of my own. I got hit in the face with a brick. Some would say it was an improvement. I was not really an oil painting beforehand, to be honest. But it was remarkable the number of people that were aware of that within moments of it happening, because that's the close-knit nature of this industry. And I've just got my train of thought back. Didcot has been the primary topic of conversation for 5 years now. Ironically, and now I've got my train of thought back, I know exactly where I was going with this. The day I had my minor encounter with a low-flying brick, I went onto a site and went through the usual induction and safety briefing and everything else. The site manager did a fine job. This was an absolute freak. But when the briefing was over, when he checked to make sure I had all the right PPE on, when he made me sign a piece of paper to say that I understood the safety implications of being on a demolition site. We walked together to where I'd set up a video camera. And while we were walking, he was asking me what I'd heard about Didcot. And that was 6 months on. Middle of 2019, I went to Japan as part of a European Demolition Association study tour to the country. And I met Americans and New Zealanders and a lot of Japanese. And when they learned where I was from and they learned what I did for a living, they asked about Didcot. It's the other side of the world. That's how far-reaching this incident was. As I say, demolition, it's a cliche. It is a cliche, but one of the things that trip to Japan reminded me of is the fact that I don't speak Japanese and very few of the Japanese spoke English. But there is a universal language of demolition, and we could make ourselves understood. And there is a universal brotherhood. I guess that's not politically correct these days. Maybe it should be brother and sisterhood, but there is a global demolition brotherhood. And that brotherhood felt the impact of Didcot when it happened, and they're still feeling the impact today. And just to illustrate that point, I didn't plan this, it's just one of the latest comments. Robert, good evening. Robert's in the Netherlands. In the nicest possible way and with the greatest respect, Robert, I would guess Robert probably couldn't even find Didcot on a map. Why would he? But he is here watching this show. He has been impacted by the incident that happened. And as I say, he's in a different country. I go back to my earlier point. What was the point of this show? I'd like to think it was to give all of you an opportunity to share your thoughts and your recollections and your hopes for what the future might hold for the investigation and for the industry that emerges after it. But I think there's something bigger, and I'm so pleased that Sadie has decided to tune in. And I guess that other point is, and Gail's here as well. Good evening, Gail, if I haven't already mentioned you. I would like the lasting thought from tonight's show to be that the families know that the HSE might be dragging its heels, the police might be dragging their heels, the media might have decided they have bigger fish to fry and more important things to worry about. But the Demolition Brotherhood hasn't forgotten. We haven't moved on. We haven't put this behind us. I went back to Didcot, as I say, last week to film the film that we played at the opening of the show. And it's astonishing how much it all came flooding back. Despite the fact that the layout of the place has changed, the cooling towers are gone, most of the buildings are gone, even some of the road layout I think has changed since I was last there. The moment I got to the gates, it all came flooding back again. I don't know if the families are planning to go back to Didcot or whether they've been today. If they are, I wish them well. If they don't, I really couldn't blame them. It seemed a strange analogy to draw the fact that I mentioned Loch Ness in the film, and if you haven't seen it, it's on YouTube. Go catch up later. Loch Ness is a weird place. If you've ever been, it's huge and it's cold and it's eerily quiet, and that's how Didcot feels now. I'd been there several times before the incident occurred, and I'd been there to see the demolition in progress. I'd been there to see the delivery of exciting new equipment, and there was a buzz about the place. And I would imagine there was even more of a buzz when the place was live and it was producing electricity, and there were potentially thousands of people working there. There was a buzz. It felt alive, like a hive of activity. And I went back last week, and it was a cold day anyway, but it felt colder than usual. Eerily quiet, even though there was still some equipment working there, still leveling the ground there. It just felt eerily quiet and wrong, not quite right, just a bit off. And I'm not one of these people that buys into hauntings and supernatural activity and all that tosh. But the place now feels like it has pain within it. And one of the things that keeps occurring to me with this, and it's occurred to me on every year that I've been back there, is the fact that this has got nothing to do with me. This has got sod all to do with me. Yeah, I write about demolition. Yes, I've been there a few times. Yes, I knew a few of the people that had worked there, and I know all of that. But I didn't know Mick or Ken or Chris or John. I may well have encountered them. As I say, I went there a few times, and maybe I did. Maybe I bumped into them. Maybe we had a chat over a cup of tea at some point. But this has got sod all to do with me. To the point where I've made a point of actively avoiding being there on the actual anniversary, because that's not my place. That's a place for the family and for the friends and the colleagues of the guys that were killed. So I don't know why I keep going back. I didn't intend to. I don't have a duty to. If this anniversary had come and gone without me commenting on it, I don't suppose anyone would have noticed. But I can't do that. And it's things like the Facebook posts from the families of some of the guys that were killed on that day, remembering fathers and grandfathers and uncles, and to allow an anniversary to pass without comment is doing a disservice to the memory of the guys. It's doing an even greater disservice to the families of the men. I've not really got anything else to say, and I think it's probably only right that the final word should come from a member of the family of one of the guys that lost his life. maybe that's it. Maybe the reason that it feels so cold and unwelcoming is the fact that it is just that. It's a graveyard. Wow. I tell you what, we're almost at the hour mark now. You've listened to me babble on for long enough. I think what I'll do is I will take that off the screen. I will press a button and I will play. If you came late, I'm going to play the film one more time. When it ends, this stream will end, and I won't be here. I'll be back on Demolition News again tomorrow, probably writing about something completely different. But Sadie and Gail and any other people that are watching that were impacted, family, friends, colleagues, I hope this show has reassured you that we haven't moved on, we haven't forgotten, and our thoughts are with you. Let's play the film, and thanks everyone for tuning in. Thanks for your comments. Thanks for your input tonight. Even though the stream ends, the comments can keep going. So if you've got anything more to say, feel free. But here's the film, and good night. And thank you again for taking part and for allowing me to do this. All the very best.
"5 years ago tomorrow, I was stood on this exact spot. In front of me was a Sky TV cameraman, and slightly to my right was a Sky TV presenter. It was bitterly cold. All of us had arrived while it was still dark. But as the sun came up, I realised why we'd chosen this spot. Because over there was a scene of utter devastation. It was the scene of a collapsed boiler house. None of us knew it at the time, but what we were looking at was the worst demolition disaster in living memory.
I'm standing at the entrance to Didcot A, as John was saying there. This is the site that is being decommissioned, some cooling towers remaining, and here at the entrance, a tight police cordon.
Fire and rescue teams from around the country are helping in this operation. One demolition worker is confirmed dead, and rescuers do not hold out much hope for the 3 who are still missing.
Oxfordshire County Council are telling us that there's been one fatality. They're confirming one fatality.
None of us could have known that 5 years later we'd still be none the wiser about what caused that accident, or that 5 years later the families of the 4 men killed on that tragic day would still be waiting to find out why their loved ones had gone to work and never came home. Many years ago I visited Loch Ness. Obviously I didn't see the monster. But as I stood on the banks of that vast expanse of water, I understood how the myth had emerged. Loch Ness is unusually quiet. It's cold. There's something about it that's just off. I know it's only my mind making associations that aren't real, but Didcot feels like that to me now. Like there's something just not quite right. The media was camped on the road that day, and I learned a lot about the way that the media works. I came here to see Sky TV, but as my interview with Sky TV ended, somebody from the BBC approached me and asked me to do an interview with them. When I finished with the BBC, I was asked to do one with ITV, and then with Channel 4. Over the course of the day, I did 11 TV interviews, plus a whole host more with news and media outlets, including newspapers and radio stations. There was a police cordon in place that day. 2 police officers were stood here to prevent traffic from getting too close to the scene. Like the rest of us, they were freezing cold. I talked to them for a while, and while we were talking, a lady came over carrying a wicker basket that looked like a prop from an episode of Miss Marple. It contained a thermos flask and several packs of homemade sandwiches. She handed the basket to the police officers and then left. On a day filled with a growing sense of horror, that's a memory that's stuck with me ever since. I was here for both the first and the second anniversary of the Didcot disaster, both times to see the media. I was here for the third and the fourth, but I was here alone. I'm here for the 5th. And I've no idea why I keep coming back, because I absolutely hate it here. I'd been driving home when I first heard news reports of an incident at the Didcot Power Station. Even though I'd been there several times at that point, my mind just didn't make the connection. It was only when I got home and my phone started to ring that I realised that the incident was demolition related. One of the things I remember from that day was how everyone was so careful in their use of language. For most of the day, everyone referred to men that were unaccounted for. It was only towards the end of the day that anyone dared utter the word missing. There was a huge amount of rumour and speculation too. Local people claimed they'd heard an explosion, and there were some initial fears that this was actually a terrorist attack. Local people attempted to reassure themselves with talk of a network of tunnels and basements in which the missing men might be hiding. Looking back, I don't think anyone was convinced. The first people to walk through these gates were the men that built the power station back in the late 1960s. Then came the men and women that kept the plant operational to provide electricity for the local region. Over the course of about 50 years, thousands of men and women walked through these gates. The last people to walk through these gates were the demolition men, responsible for taking the power station down. Over the course of more than 50 years, thousands of people walked through these gates, but 4 of them never walked back out again. The body of Mick Collins was recovered almost immediately, before the Health and Safety Executive threw a cordon around the entire site. The remains of the 3 other men would lay undiscovered for more than 6 months. They would not be recovered until after the remains of the collapsed boiler house had been felled in a controlled explosion on the morning of the 17th of July 2016. On the 31st of August 2016, 190 days after the boiler house collapsed, it was confirmed that a body had been found in the rubble. On the 3rd of September, that body was identified as Christopher Huxtable. On the 8th of September 2016, police confirmed they'd found the body of another of the remaining 2 missing men. On the 9th of September, the body was formally identified as that of Ken Cresswell. The last missing worker was found on the same day. He was identified as John Shaw. 199 days had elapsed since the day of the accident. I did about 20 media interviews the day after the accident. I've probably done about another 50 since. That's hundreds and hundreds of questions, and I fielded all of them. But I haven't answered any. There were no answers on the day after the accident. And as I stand here on the same spot that I was stood 1,826 days ago, I still don't have any answers. Sadly, painfully and tragically, neither does anybody else.